Good morning, friends. Today, I want to ask a question. What gives you courage? What gives you courage to do hard, unthinkable things? If you ever watched the X Games on ESPN or any kind of extreme sport event, you may have noticed that Red Bull is one of the main sponsors. I'm talking about extreme events, not like football and basketball. I'm talking about wingsuit flying, or cliff jumping, or skateboard mega ramp. Red Bull, the energy drink, has been sponsoring these events for years because they want to send you a message. They want you to believe that Red Bull gives you wings. In other words, the Red Bull gives you courage. But if you are a normal person who has had an energy drink or two before, you know that when we have an energy drink, the most courageous thing that we get to do is to try, and I mean try, to stay up all night and meet a deadline, right? And often fail at that. We know that Red Bull nor any other energy drink, that doesn't really give you courage. So I ask again, what gives you courage? What gives you courage to do the really hard, unthinkable things of life? Hard things like standing up against the violent systems of our society. Systems that threaten the lives of children and immigrants. Systems that polarize and weaponize different opinions to put against church members against one another, and family members against one another. What gives you courage to stand up against those things? And as we turn to the text, we ask this question of the midwives. What gave Shiphrah and Puah courage to stand up against Pharaoh? If you remember the end of Genesis, Pharaoh owned all of Egypt by the end of that book. And I mean all of it, both the people and the land. Pharaoh was perhaps the most powerful person of that time. And we know that powerful people usually get what they want. That was true then as it is now. You watch the news and see a powerful leader waging war against a country for months, even years, without being personally affected by it. And we see another powerful leader harass employees without ever going to jail or even being fired. And millions of other powerful persons waste food, water, and other resources while entire countries go weeks without it. Powerful people usually get what they want. And Pharaoh was a powerful person who wanted the Hebrew population contained. So what could Shiphrah and Puah possibly do? Better yet, what could make them think? What could make them try to do something? What gave them courage? Well, perhaps you look at verse 15 and you say that the answer is obvious. It says, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives. You read that and you say, well, they were Hebrew midwives. They wouldn't kill people from their own nationality. Well, good answer, except that the Hebrew language is not that clear. You can't translate this to interpret that these midwives were Hebrew women, that this refers to their nationality. But you can also translate this, meaning that these are midwives assigned to the Hebrews. You see the difference there? And besides, throughout this entire chapter, Pharaoh is trying to use Egyptians to kill Hebrews. In verse 9, he tries to use Egyptians to oppress Hebrews. In verse 22, he tries to use Egyptians to oppress Hebrews. So it's only logical to think that the same thing is happening on verse 15 here. Pharaoh is trying to use Egyptian midwives to kill Hebrew babies. So it's not their nationality that gave them courage. They're not standing up for their own people. Well then, perhaps it's a desire for self-preservation. They want to keep their jobs and their reputation as midwives. Because midwives give life, they don't take it. They know that if they kill babies, they will never get a job again. Nobody's going to hire them, right? So they stand up against Pharaoh to protect their jobs. Okay. Except that if you disobey a powerful man like Pharaoh in this time, you're going to need no job because you're going to have no life. Let's be honest here, friends. Pharaoh can kill them at any time. So it's not self-preservation. The midwives are not standing up against Pharaoh because of their nationality, because they want to protect their jobs. That's not what's giving them courage. So what gives them courage? Well, keep reading and you get to verse 17, where it reads, "The midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. The midwives feared God." It was not their nationality or self-preservation that gave them courage. It was the fear of the Lord. Because the fear of the Lord gives you courage. The midwives were able to stand up against Pharaoh because they feared God. They were able to reject the orders of a powerful king because they knew an even more powerful king. They were able to say no to death because they knew the God of life. The midwives feared God, and that gave them courage. Because the fear of the Lord gives you courage. And the book of Exodus is all about the fear of God. As you go on in this book, the power of God is revealed further and further. And the more it's revealed, the more people catch on to it. You see, at the burning bush, it's just Moses. And then when the plagues starts to strike Egypt, the Israelites start to fear God. And by the time of Passover, Pharaoh fears God enough to let the people go. It's a crescendo of God's most powerful demonstrations so that people fear and know the Lord. But before all that, before the burning bush, the midwives feared God. Y'all, these were simple women. They were not part of the Egyptian elite. They didn't even have a cool job status because I imagine that Call the Midwife was not part of the Egyptian Netflix at the time. No, they were powerless people. And that's what made them prime candidates to fear the Lord. Because the fear of the Lord is often found among the powerless. That has always been the case in Christianity. If you've studied Christian history, you know that this is a faith of the powerless. It always begins with people at the margins of society who get to know this powerful God. And every time the powerful people get on board with it, it feels like the fire of the church just moves somewhere else. It moved from Jerusalem to Europe. and from Europe to North America, and from North America to South America. And now we see the power, the fire of the church spreading in Asia and Africa. Because the fear of the Lord is often found among the powerless. I'm not saying that rich, powerful people cannot know God. What I am saying is that when we have all the resources, when we have all the connections, when we can do it all on our own, it's harder. It's harder to know God. As Timothy Keller puts it, if you want to know God's grace, all you need is need. All you need is need. What wise words. That's why the fear of the Lord is often found among the powerless. That's how Shiphrah and Puah found themselves coming in front of Pharaoh in that moment. Have you felt that way? Have you had a moment in which you came face to face with a great challenge and found yourself completely empty? It's in that moment that you can experience the power of the Lord. Because powerlessness is a perfect opportunity to fear God. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of courage. Now, as I say this, I imagine that there are two kinds of answers floating in your minds here. Some of you are very encouraged by what I'm saying here. For some of you, there's a fire growing in you. There's a fire growing in you because now you feel like you can do it. Now you feel like with the knowledge of the Lord, or the fear of the Lord, you can do this thing. You just want to know what this thing is because you feel like you just had a Red Bull and you're ready to jump out of a plane with so much courage. And I ask you to hold on, because the midwives actually show us what to do with the fear of the Lord. Hold on for a second. Some others of you may not feel encouraged by this at all. Because perhaps you've had that moment. You've had that moment of powerlessness and you didn't find courage. You feared God, but you couldn't stop it. You couldn't stand up for yourself. You couldn't stand up for the oppressed. And if that's you, hold on. Hold on, because this passage has something for you too. Okay? Hold on just a couple minutes. First, let's talk about what to do with this fear. Because the fear of the Lord the fear of the Lord produces courage, but it's not courage to do crazy stunts. In fact, it's not even courage to punch Pharaoh in the face however much we want to do it. Actually, it's courage to do the exact opposite. The fear of the Lord gives us courage to stand up against violent systems. The fear of the Lord gives us courage to break systems of violence. In this chapter, we see a system of violence developing, and Pharaoh wants to move on and on with this. But the powerless midwives, they say no. They say no. We will give life. We will participate, not in your schemes of violence, Pharaoh. We will participate in God's life-giving mission. Because the fear of the Lord gives us power, gives us courage to break down cycles of violence. And this is true all throughout Exodus. The women of this book are life givers, y'all. It begins here with Shiphrah and Puah, but it continues on. It continues on with Jochebed and Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter and Zipporah. In fact, the book of Exodus, even in a patriarchal society, names at least 6 system-defined women who put their lives at risk to save Moses' life. And except for Pharaoh's daughter, all of them had a high probability of failing. They didn't know if they were going to succeed. When Shiphrah and Puah are called back into Pharaoh's court in verse 18, look at this. They don't know if Pharaoh is not going to kill them right on the spot and just find someone else to kill the babies. They don't know if they're going to succeed. But that's not the point. When you fear God, the point is not whether you're going to succeed or fail. The point is not what you can do with the system. Because when you fear God, you trust God. And you do the faithful, right thing yourself, trusting God to do the rest. The fear of the Lord gives us courage to break cycles of violence, even when we don't think we will be successful. 6 women. Took 6 women, at least 6 women, to save Moses' life. And I wonder, how many women did it take for you to be here today? How many women did it take for me to be preaching up here today? Perhaps you think of a mother figure in your life. But don't forget that teacher who spent money out of her own meager salary to buy classroom supplies for you. Don't forget women like Rosa Parks who went to jail so that people of all races could come together. Don't forget women like Mary who bare the shame of bearing a child out of wedlock to bring joy to the world. System-defined, life-giving women empowered by the fear of the Lord. What are their examples calling you to do? How are their examples inspiring you to break down cycles of violence in your church, in your family, whatever God may lead you? How is the fear of the Lord calling you to be courageous enough to break down a cycle of violence? That's what you do with courage. But what about when we don't feel courageous? What if you're hearing this and you don't feel encouraged at all? Well, turn your attention to verse 21. It says, because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. The text doesn't say because the midwives were courageous. The text doesn't put courage as a reward. Courage is a gift. And this gift is like the gift of families. Now, courage, families, how do they go together here? Well, if you read the Hebrew closely, the word for family here is actually houses. And if Shiphrah and Puah were Egyptian women, as I believe they were, the fact that God gave them houses, gave them families, it's more than just a husband and kids. It's God gave them a space. God gave them a place among his own people. You see what's going on here? Because the midwives feared God, God gave them a place among his people. God adopted them. Friends, the fear of the Lord gives us courage. But this courage is no reckless drive. This courage is not the courage to do stunts. This courage is like confidence. Confidence of a little child who knows she is loved, who knows she's part of a family. That's the reward that we get from fearing the Lord. When we fear the Lord, we get courage because we know that we are part of his family. When we fear the Lord, when we trust him with all our lives, when we trust him in the revelation of Jesus Christ, we go on confident. We live in this word faithfully because we know that the God of life, the King of Kings, has adopted us. He is our Father. And like beloved children, we seek to please our Father every day. But we do so in peace. We do so confident. at the end of the day, the fear of the Lord will give us a home. And that's how the fear of the Lord gives us courage.